Daf Yomi, Tractate Bava, page 51a at the top of the page, with the words La Mishum Deles Be Havla. Rav Nachman responds, no, he is exempt here because there are not sufficient fumes to cause death, in accordance with the opinion of Rav. Nevertheless, the impact from hitting the ground is sufficient to cause death, and therefore an ox that fell into a water channel is suspected of being a treifa. Rava again challenges him. If so, then how is the statement, if the animal is injured by it, he is liable, to be explained? There are not sufficient fumes? Rav Nachman said to him, there are not sufficient fumes to cause death, but there are sufficient fumes to cause injury. Rava raised an objection to the opinion of Rav Nachman from a Mishnah, Sanhedrin 45a. The structure from which the punishment of stoning was implemented was a height of 2 people, and it is taught in that regard in a Braita, when the 2-person height of the structure is combined with his height, that is the height of the one being stoned, there is a total height equal to that of 3 people. Rava explains his objection, and if it enters your mind that there is an impact capable of causing death in a pit less than 10 handbreadths deep, why do I need all this height? Rav Nachman answered him, and according to your reasoning, let us make the structure a minimal 10 handbreadths. Why must it have a height of 2 people? Rather, no proof can be brought from here, since the reason is in accordance with the opinion of Rav Nachman. As Rav Nachman says that Rabba bar Avu says that the verse states, and you shall love your fellow as yourself, Leviticus 19:18, teaching that even with regard to a condemned prisoner, select a good, that is, compassionate death for him. Therefore, the structure used for stoning is constructed sufficiently high that he dies quickly, without any unnecessary suffering. The Gemara asks, if so, let us raise the structure even more, so that his death will be even less painful. The Gemara answers, this is not done, because if he fell from a greater height, his organs will be crushed and he will become completely disfigured, which is certainly not the way one would prefer to die. Rava again raised an objection to the opinion of Rav Nachman. The Torah requires constructing a parapet on the roof of one's house to prevent anyone from falling to his death. As the verse states, Deuteronomy 22a, you shall not bring blood upon your house. If any man falls from it, the term from it teaches that liability exists only for falling from the roof of the house, but not onto the roof of a house. How is this so? If an area in the public domain was 10 handbreadths higher than a private house, and the owner did not construct a fence between his house and the public domain, and someone fell from inside the public domain onto the house, the owner of the house is exempt. By contrast, if the public domain was 10 handbreadths lower than the house, and the owner did not construct a fence on his roof, and someone fell from the roof of the house into the public domain, he is liable. And if it enters your mind that there is a sufficiently strong impact to cause death, even at a height of less than 10 handbreadths, why do I need the roof to be 10 handbreadths high for there to be a requirement to construct a parapet? Rav Nachman said to him, the halacha of the parapet for the roof of a house is different, since any structure less than 10 handbreadths is not classified as a house, and only a house requires a parapet. Rava objects if that is so, that is, if the requirement to build a parapet is limited to a house that is 10 handbreadths high, then also now, where the house is 10 handbreadths higher than the public domain when measured from the outside, remove the height of the ceiling and the plaster, which is an additional layer on the top of the ceiling. When measured from the inside of this manner, its height is not 10. According to you, then, it is not classified as a house. Rav Nachman said to him, it is a case where he hollowed out an extra space inside the floor of the house so that its height would be 10 handbreadths. Rava challenges him, if so, in a situation where the house is not 10 handbreadths from the outside as well, you can find a scenario where it is 10 handbreadths from the inside, such as where he hollowed out extra space in the floor, thereby transforming it into a house with the required height. Why then would a person be exempt in this case? The Gemara answers, rather, the previous explanation must be entirely rejected. And this is the reasoning of Rav Nachman when he ruled that one must suspect that the ox's organs were crushed upon falling into the water channel. He maintains the following argument. How far is the distance from the stomach of the ox to the ground? It is 4 handbreadths. How deep is the water channel? It is 6 handbreadths. This totals 10 handbreadths. Therefore, it transpires that when the ox hits the ground, it is from a height of 10 handbreadths that it hits the ground, since it landed on its stomach and not on its feet. The Gemara asks, but with regard to the Mishnah, which teaches just as a pit that has sufficient depth to cause death when falling into it is at least 10 handbreadths deep, so too any other excavations that have sufficient depth to cause death may be no less than 10 handbreadths deep. Why not say that a pit with 6 handbreadths would also be sufficient? The sages said in reply, the Mishnah is referring to a case where the animal rolled into the pit, in which case the pit would be required to have a depth of 10 handbreadths. By contrast, if it fell while walking, the extra height from the ground to its stomach is included in calculating the 10 handbreadths. New Mishnah. Bor shel shnei shutim avar alav harishon v'lo kisahu v'hasheni v'lo kisahu hasheni chayev. Mishnah. If a pit belonging to 2 partners was uncovered, and the first partner passed by it and did not cover it, and then the second passed by and did not cover it, the second is liable for any damage caused by means of the pit. Gemara. The sages say, how can you find such a case of a pit belonging to 2 partners? This works out well if we hold in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who says that one who digs a pit on his own property and then declares the property but not the pit ownerless is liable for damage. According to him, you find such a case where the courtyard belongs to both of them and the pit belongs to both of them, and they renounced ownership of their property but did not renounce ownership of their pit. In that case, both are responsible for any damage caused. But if we hold that one who digs a pit on his own property and then declares the property but not the pit ownerless is exempt from liability for damage caused, how can you find a case of a pit for which a person is liable? It can only be a case where it is located in the public domain. And how can you find a case of a pit belonging to two partners in the public domain. If they both jointly appointed an agent and said to him, "Go dig a pit for us," and he went and dug a pit for both of them, then neither is liable. This is because there is no agency for transgression, and the digger is solely responsible. And if this partner dug a pit 5 handbreadths deep, and this partner dug 5 further handbreadths deep, the significance of the initial act of digging performed by the first partner has been removed. Now all responsibility rests with the second partner, who deepened the pit to 10 handbreadths, which is the minimum depth for which one is liable for an animal's death. Therefore, this is also not treated as a jointly owned pit. The Gemara notes this works out well according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and you find in a case of damage that both would be liable, as the Gemara will soon explain. Therefore, it qualifies as a case of a pit belonging to two partners. But according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the first partner is not held liable at all in a case where the pit causes an animal's death. And according to the opinion of the rabbis, the first partner is not held liable both in a situation where it causes death and in a situation where it merely causes damage. If so, how can you find an instance of a pit belonging to partners? On Rabbi Yochanan says this is referring to a case where they both extracted a chunk of earth from the bottom of the pit simultaneously and thereby completed it to a depth of 10 handbreadths. This then would constitute a pit belonging to both of them. Having mentioned the dispute between Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi and the rabbis, the Gemara inquires, what is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi and what is the opinion of the rabbis? As it is taught in the Braita, with regard to one who digs a pit 9 handbreadths deep, and another person came and completed the digging to a depth of 10 handbreadths, the latter individual alone is liable for an injury or death caused by the pit. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says one follows the latter for restitution for death caused by the pit. The latter is solely liable, since only a pit of 10 handbreadths renders a person liable for an animal's death, and one follows both of them for restitution for damage caused by the pit. The Gemara explains what is the reason for the opinion of the rabbis. As the verse states, if a man shall open a pit, or if a man shall dig a pit, Exodus 21:33, raises the question, if he is liable for opening a covered pit that has already been dug, then is it not all the more so that he should be liable for digging a new pit? What then does the latter phrase add? Rather, the verse serves to include the case of one person who begins to dig a pit, and after he does so, a second person continues to dig. By subsequently stating, if a man shall dig a pit, the Torah teaches that a new pit is effectively created by the second digger, whose digging removed, that is, rendered irrelevant, the action of the first digger, and who bears full responsibility for the pit. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi could have said to you, these two clauses in the verse are both necessary, and the second clause cannot serve to teach the halakha of the sole liability of the second digger. The reason they are necessary is, as we said earlier in 50a, where interpretations were cited according to both Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara asks, and don't the rabbis also agree that they are necessary for those interpretations? If so, what is the source of their opinion that the responsibility for the pit rests solely with the second partner? Rather, the previous explanation must be rejected, and this is the reason of the rabbis. The verse states, if a man shall dig a pit, indicating that one person is liable, but not two. Therefore, if two people jointly created the pit, the second bears responsibility, and not the first. The Gemara asks, and how does Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi understand the phrase, if a man shall dig a pit? The Gemara answers, he requires that phrase to teach another halakha. The phrase, if a man shall dig a pit, indicates that a person who digs a pit is liable, but one is not liable if an ox digs a pit. The Gemara asks, and from where do the rabbis derive this halakha? The Gemara answers that the combination of words man and pit is written twice. If a man shall open a pit, or if a man shall dig a pit, from one phrase the halakha is derived that a person must do the digging and not an animal. From the second phrase the halakha is derived that one person bears responsibility for the damage and not two people. The Gemara asks, and what does Rabbi Yehuda Nasi derive from this repetition? The Gemara answers that in his opinion, since the Torah wrote this first clause using wording, it similarly wrote this second clause in the same fashion. The repetition is for stylistic reasons and is not meant to teach a new halakha. I think we'll stop here due to time.